I was assigned the investigation in late summer when a 27-year-old camper failed to return from a 3-day trip in a remote area of southwestern Colorado near the border with New Mexico. The area is part of the vast San Juan National Forest, rough terrain, dense woods and ravines where radio signals vanish without warning. My job was to coordinate the search and document every finding with precision, no speculation. The missing man's campsite was intact, tent set up, backpack leaning against a log, food untouched inside a sealed container. There were no signs of a struggle or dragging. The only unusual detail was the way the soil was disturbed around the site, as if someone had walked in circles near the extinguished fire pit. The first tracks we found didn't match the camper's boots. They were large, human in shape, but far too wide, with defined toes and a depth that suggested considerable weight. They weren't hours old, but they weren't aged either. We followed them uphill for nearly half a kilometer. My team assumed they could belong to a bear whose prints had been distorted by erosion. I wasn't convinced. As we moved forward, one of the volunteers called my attention to another set of tracks. These were different. They resembled those of a large dog, but the proportions were off. The central pad was more elongated, and the toes appeared longer and more separated. What unsettled me was the pattern. They didn't follow the typical layout of a quadruped. In some stretches, the prints appeared almost in a straight line, as if something upright were leaving canine-shaped impressions. We never saw that other creature, but its trail ran parallel to the large human-like tracks. On the afternoon of the second day, while checking a clearing about 2 kilometers from the campsite, I saw it. It stood at the edge of the forest, partially obscured by shadow. Over 2 meters tall, heavy build, very broad shoulders, arms that seemed disproportionately long. The fur was dark, with lighter areas along the forearms. It didn't have the hunched posture often shown in sensational documentaries. It stood upright and steady. It didn't seem to be watching me. It slowly turned its head from side to side, as if tracking something. It would walk a few steps, stop, lean slightly toward the ground, then lift its gaze toward the thicker part of the woods. Its movements were deliberate, focused. There was no visible aggression, no curiosity about our presence either. It was as if it were following a specific trail. It would hold still for several seconds, then resume moving with long, quiet strides. I had the distinct feeling we were witnessing something that wasn't meant for us. I radioed in quietly and instructed the team not to approach the clearing. The last thing I wanted was to trigger an unpredictable reaction. The figure crossed the open space and entered the opposite tree line, vanishing among the trunks with nothing more than the faint crack of dry branches. When we inspected the clearing minutes later, we found both types of tracks, the large human-shaped prints and the canine-like ones with the strange pattern. Both led towards steeper terrain filled with rocks and deep crevices. Beyond that point, tracking became impossible. We never found the camper. The official report concluded disorientation and accidental fall in mountainous terrain. The unusual tracks were logged as unidentified animal markings. I did not describe in detail what I saw, only noted large bipedal figure observed at distance. In this line of work, you learn to choose your words carefully. What unsettles me most isn't the creature I saw, but the impression that it was searching for someone, as if the missing man hadn't been the only one moving through those woods. Since then, every time I review a case in that area, I can't shake the thought that more things share that forest than we're willing to admit, and that some of them are following trails in the dark. I've worked as a park ranger in western Colorado for more than a decade, and I've seen just about everything, from lost hikers to poachers who think no one is watching. What happened that fall was different. and it ended up changing the way we handled night patrols in the mountainous area near San Isabel National Forest. The initial order was simple: check reports of abandoned campsites and campfires lit in restricted areas. Nothing unusual. My partner and I drove up a gravel road that wound between tall pines and ground thick with damp needles. The air smelled like resin and cold earth. It was close to 10 at night when we found the first sign that something wasn't right. There were footprints along the edge of the trail. They weren't bear tracks. I've seen hundreds of those and can recognize them even when mud distorts the shape. These were longer, with a defined arch and 5 clearly marked toes. They measured over 30 centimeters. My first thought was a prank, but there were no boot prints nearby, no sign of a vehicle, just those deep impressions leading into the forest. We followed the trail with powerful flashlights. I'm not someone who believes in stories, but the feeling was uncomfortable, like the woods were paying attention to every step we took. About 100 meters from the trail, we heard a sharp knock against a tree trunk. It wasn't the wind. My partner muttered that it could be an elk hitting antlers against bark, though it wasn't the season for that. Then we saw it. About 40 meters away, between 2 thick trunks, a tall silhouette was watching us. I estimated it stood well over 6 feet, maybe closer to 7. Broad shoulders, a body covered in brown fur, not a flat tone, but streaked with lighter patches across the chest. Its face wasn't the cartoonish ape you see on television. It had more human proportions, a defined jaw and a wide nose. Its eyes caught the beam of my flashlight for a second. It simply did not move. There was no obvious aggression, but no fear either. It stood upright, head slightly tilted, as if assessing us. I felt that pressure in my chest that tells you you're facing something that doesn't fit into what you thought was possible. My partner whispered that we should back away slowly. When I lowered the flashlight for a moment to speak into the radio, we heard a heavy crack. I lifted the light again, and it was no longer in the same spot. It had shifted to the left without us noticing, using the trees as cover. It didn't run. It walked with long, steady strides, almost silent for its size, and within seconds it disappeared into the darkness. The last thing we saw was its broad back and the controlled swing of its arms. We returned to the truck without saying much. The next day, we filed the report with as much detail as possible. The official response was cautious. No creature was mentioned in the final document, only unidentified activity and a recommendation that patrols be conducted in pairs with altered routes and less predictable schedules. Weeks later, 2 other teams reported tree knocks and tall silhouettes in the same area. Not everyone admitted it openly, but the tension was noticeable. Additional trail cameras were installed and certain sectors were restricted under the pretext of environmental conservation. I never saw it again, but every time I patrol that stretch of forest, I feel like something is watching from the tree line. I don't believe it was a misidentified bear. I don't believe it was a prank. What I saw that night had intelligence in its eyes and a level of confidence that didn't belong to any ordinary animal. And even though the incident was never made public, it changed our routine for good. The report came in like so many others. Injured hunter, possible large animal attack in a mountainous area north of Durango, within San Juan National Forest. I was on duty that morning and the first to respond. I figured it was a startled bear or maybe an elk during rutting season. Nothing I hadn't dealt with before. The man was sitting on the tailgate of his truck when I arrived. His arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage and his shirt was torn from shoulder to chest. He didn't seem in shock, just disoriented. He kept repeating the same thing. It wasn't a bear. His rifle leaned against the door, 1 round already fired. He told me he had been tracking a deer for over an hour. At some point, he realized something else was tracking him. Heavy footsteps to his right, moving parallel to his path. He assumed it was another hunter trying to push the animal off course. He moved deeper into the woods to gain the advantage, and that's when he saw it crossing between the trees about 30 meters away. He said it was too large to be human and too upright to be a bear. I wrote everything down without interrupting. We hiked together to the site of the incident. As we moved in, I found deep impressions in the fresh mud, human in shape but enormous. The stride was long, over a meter between prints. There were no claw marks like you'd expect from a bear moving at speed. I also noticed young trees bent at a height above my head. In the clearing where the attack happened, the signs of struggle were obvious. Disturbed soil, broken branches, and a dark stain that had already begun to dry. The hunter pointed to the exact spot where the creature stepped out from between the pines. According to him, it stood at least 7 feet tall. Broad shoulders, thick chest, long, muscular arms covered in dark brown hair with lighter patches across the back. The face wasn't flat like a common primate. It had defined features, a strong jaw, and an expression he described as intelligent. He said that when he raised his rifle, the creature advanced with unexpected speed. It didn't drop to all fours. It stayed upright, moving with long, direct strides. It struck him with its forearm, throwing him to the ground. The tear across his chest wasn't deep, more of a surface rip, almost like a warning. He managed to fire into the air as the figure leaned over him. It simply did not move for a second, stared down at him, then stepped back. That pause gave him the chance to drag himself toward a slope and roll several meters downhill, out of the clearing. By the time he managed to stand, the creature was no longer in front of him. He only heard heavy footsteps retreating through the trees. As I examined the area, I felt that familiar, unwelcome sensation of being watched. I didn't see anything directly, but along the tree line, at a distance, I thought I caught movement. Nothing conclusive, nothing I could photograph or submit as solid proof. The official report categorized the case as an unconfirmed wildlife encounter. Recommendations were issued to exercise caution and avoid solo patrols in that section of forest. The hunter survived with minor injuries and a story many dismissed as exaggerated. I didn't. I've seen bear attacks. I know what those wounds look like. This was different. There was force, yes, but no clear intent to kill. It felt as though the creature had decided how far to go and chosen not to cross a certain line. Since then, whenever I respond to calls in that area, I don't just look for known animal tracks. I study the tree line more carefully, aware that sometimes the one who goes out to hunt isn't the only one following a trail.